Right, our next speaker is Gillian Tomlinson, Chief Digital and Data Officer for the Weir Group, and Jill wants to talk about measuring the economic value of data. So, Jill.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. I was told not to take a mass exodus as to heart, and I think had I known I was following Daniel, I probably would have asked for a later slot. So. One thing, just to introduce myself, so I currently work for the Weir Group. I head up digital and data for the Weir Group, which is a 150-year-old mining engineering organization. We're global. Our head office is in Glasgow, so I fly up to Scotland quite regularly, but we've got operations all over the world. Previous to this, then the reason actually I'm speaking about data monetization is that I've been in the data industry and data world for 20 years of my life, without giving away my age. But in my former years, I was involved in developing credit bureaus in emerging markets with Dun & Bradstreet, so across Middle East and Africa, working with the regulators, UN Economic Forum, and banks to be able to actually build data environments that could fuel a credit economy. And that's kind of probably one of the oldest examples of monetization there is out there, is how you actually build up data in a credit bureau, and then obviously you sell that, but also then you apply analytics to be able to facilitate further revenue generation within that company. And then more recently, the last 10 years, I've been a chief data officer in multiple guises. I've led programs for data in the banks, RBS, Lloyds, HSBC, and then I was chief data officer of Whitbread, so smart hotels, smart restaurants, Costa Coffee, very much above the line analytics, driving obviously very much that real-time customer proposition. And my previous role was, I was then CDO of RSA Insurance, so the insurance company that does both commercial and consumer insurance. And there we were very much looking at how you monetize the value of data to drive risk management, reduce your kind of risk assessments. And in the telco, my previous role, I headed up data analytics and data monetization for 3 UK, which I saw them, they've got a booth outside. But I basically, I was responsible for actually directly generating revenue as part of the data proposition with a telco as well. There's a click over here. I don't know the clicker. That's all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with effectively, look, I'm not in data or digital unless I'm wearing jeans, unless I put something really snazzy up as the first slide. But I think I'm going to start with, and this is going to look slightly different to a TED Talk. Okay, I've got a lot more information on here, which is probably indicative of the problem we've got in corporates today. But I'm going to start off with just my definition of data monetization, because I think there's a lot of flavors of it across the board in the market. So, and one of the things I just wanted to actually talk about was kind of the definition, right, of the fact that all these companies out there talking about data being the new oil. And I try not to gag when I talk about that, but effectively, I think it stemmed from the fact that we have been pushing the value of data in these companies, and for the CEO and the boards to realize the value of data for so long, and finally they're saying, okay, data is the new oil. But actually, if you talk about, and there are similarities, you refine data, you mine it, you process it, absolutely, and it fuels your processes, it fuels your business. But actually, the fundamentals of data monetization are where data and oil are not similar. So number one, it's a non-depleting asset. It can be consumed multiple times. It's non-rivalist, so you can actually sell it and provide it to multiple different users for multiple different purposes and to feed multiple different processes. And thirdly, it's regenerative. So when you use oil, it doesn't generate more oil. Every single time you use data, you're generating more data. And the really core components of data monetization are where it increases in value the more you connect. And I think Daniel mentioned it earlier as well in terms of open architectures and that type of economy. So let's talk a little bit about the definitions, kind of the more traditional ones, and then where we're actually heading. So I think, clearly there's first-party data. So selling your data, so basically internally within a company, being able to actually qualify the economic benefit, revenue increase, margin, cost reduction, customer experience improvement through the actual data that you provide the business and the analytical use cases that you actually provision. So, for example, when I was in RSA Insurance, we had a direct revenue number associated to predictive maintenance, or predictive analytics, because what we were doing is trying to re-engineer our processes to improve productivity and optimize our efficiency. And we could directly measure that basically within the use cases that we were developing. Or if actually you're looking at automate or using AI and machine learning, you automate your operations, you can directly measure the benefit that basically that activity and that use case has. The second thing, from an economic benefit perspective in your company, the more and the more models you develop, the more you actually get that efficiency of time to delivery. The more intelligence you develop, the more reusability you've got as well. Secondly is second-party data. So this is where you combine your own data with somebody else's data. So for example, in the telco I was working with, so we location data, wonderful, right? Used to hopefully allow the smart cars to drive down the road in a very accurate way. And connectivity obviously on that basis as well. But effectively, I was working for a company that owned a number of opcos. So we partnered with the UK power networks. And what we did is we built a data analytical model using their data and obviously the telco data to actually measure and map the capacity across their grid. So in other words, drive efficiency of how they produce electricity across their grid. And obviously there's an external benefit because this can also allow them to actually get ready for smart vehicles, smart cars, EV. In your insurance industry, collecting real-time data from the whole engine ships, as the ship goes over the ocean and feeding that into your risk management models. Right? So it's about combining sets of data. And then there's obviously the third one, which is really about, and I spoke about the credit bureau being a perfect example, right, is you've got third parties who collect data across the board and obviously disseminate that across. And I think there's a real wave now, Snowflake, Microsoft, AWS, industry platforms, marketplaces, API-driven integration of data, both externally and internally. And then I want to say something else is, this is going to be controversial, I think CDOs are set up to fail, predominantly in most organizations, because I think we go into an organization, and this is where the last point I wanted to make about new business models is, and I think Daniel spoke about it earlier as well, is we go into an organization, and the remit is data retention, so keep as minimal amount of data as possible to reduce cost. Lock everything down as much as possible so we can ensure security, right, around our data. And actually, when we think about, and you're going to hear talks about the metaverse, kind of how we're evolving with ESG, data sharing is really kind of moving at the speed of knots. That is not helpful. And also the economic benefit and the value of data, and what we're talking about when we talk about it not being oil, it's regenerative. So that development of data is a real asset that you can actually exploit in multiple different ways. But if you're locking it down and you're actually limiting the amount of data you collect, you're never going to realize that potential. And as the world moves forward, at the moment, I think it's a real limitation. So where we're seeing people actually harnessing opportunities based on what's happening in the market. So what are the shifts in headwinds kind of impacting monetizing your data or ensuring that you can place an economic benefit against your data? So number one is clearly disruption. COVID, war in Russia, Ukraine, basically the global impact of hedge funds shorting companies, for example, from a share perspective versus the fact that the financial book looks different, is a real headwind that's actually impacting it. But also it's forcing companies to address where they generate value within their organization from. Number two is competitors. So they're coming out of left field now. So your competitors are digitally transforming. They're looking at how they maximize the value of data, right? They're partnering with different organizations out there, but also, and I'll give you an example, Anglo-American approached the supply market and said, we want to build a hydrogen battery. We want to reduce our emissions footprint within our mine site. We want to build a hydrogen battery, and therefore, went out to market and they got quoted 5 years for the development. They went and built it in-house. So what does this mean? This means now that there's a competitor, a mining company, that actually can sell hydrogen batteries to the forestry industry, to potentially it can become a consumer-driven product as well. So this is happening across the board. The more you embrace the digital data transformation, the more you can actually capitalize on it, the more you can find new business models in order to be able to actually expand out there. Tech trends, so technology changes in an industry shape a digital business. And we see that happening, right? So cloud, effectively, digital currencies, blockchain, These are game changers, right? Especially if you're working in a global market where now suppliers in countries like Zimbabwe, where you don't want to actually work with the Zimbabwean dollar, you'd rather work with a cryptocurrency because it's less volatile, if you can believe that. That's becoming a real thing, and that's where your payment infrastructure needs to also support that and change and become far more open. And then obviously a digital workforce, which I think General did a really good job of actually explaining, the challenge of how you actually upskill individuals, but also then where do you start? It's not just training programs. Do you drive the technology first? Do you change and automate your processes first and then force basically the run and measurement of that? I think the other thing is typically data and digital teams, they constantly say they're not listened to. So I think companies don't necessarily nurture talent in the right way. I think there is a real need to focus on how you actually you drive your digital transformation and become that digital business, but really focus on how you change your workforce. The customer expectations changing at the rate of knots. If you all use iPhones, every customer, B2C, B2B, wants to be able to have a digital proposition. They want things quicker, they want things smoother, and they're getting offered that from competitors as well. And then sustainability, which is a game changer, right? So 1 and 2, we're all kind of grappling with, trying to measure our own ESG footprint, social, economic, people, diversity, everything internally. Then you're looking at how your product performs as well, your supply chains. The scope 3 and 4, different ball game altogether. You cannot measure your product in use unless you share data with your customer. And you can definitely not measure the indirect impact of your product in scope 4 unless you actually broaden that wider and you start looking at marketplace data sharing. You start looking at those data points that actually expand out. So there's and then also we talk about consistency. If I measure ESG, there isn't necessarily consistent frameworks that have been mandated across the board. So that's also a big change that's happening. And then the last one, interoperability is key. So data interoperability is key. It's not about tech boxes, and this is an amazing event. I went to Big Data London as well, but the amount of tech out, the amount of opportunities, the amount of options, it's mind-blowing, and it's really scary, right? Like, where do you hedge your bets? What bets do you take to be able to enable the investment you're making now and how you actually evolve? But I do think, obviously edge computing and AI, Daniel, amazing. I won't go into that, but I'm going to mention it now in the use cases I've got. So given these shifts and headwinds, what's actually happening in terms of the opportunities in this space? So one example of which, and you might know this already, but during COVID, the airlines effectively got into real trouble, clearly. And if you look at United Airlines and American Airlines, so what their challenge was, they wanted to raise a loan, $4 billion, and specifically, American Airlines. And they were really struggling because they lease their airlines, right? They lease their airplanes. So they don't have commodities to mortgage a loan against. So what did they do? They said, well, what else do we have? And they said, oh, we have a loyalty program. Let's get some insurance companies and PE companies that have actually done valuations in, and let's value our actual loyalty program itself. It came back with 2 to 3 times more bigger valuation on the loyalty program than the actual organization themselves, than the entire airline. So, that is a fundamental shift. Accounting standards have not helped us. They're archaic, right? We don't treat assets, data as an asset, capitalizing it on balance sheets necessarily. It's a struggle that we face into, but this just shows that there's a massive change out there, right? So, and I think this is a challenge for us as practitioners in companies as well, because do you really have to build big data ownership models and try and convince the business that they need to change and do all this training and literacy programs and stuff? If you were measuring on balance sheet data as an asset, I guarantee you're going to get the support and investment you need to drive that out, right? So I think that's a fundamental lesson to be learned, but this is obviously where that shift's happened with the airlines. And then just talk about my industry. So I'm not the typically looking mining engineering site worker, but I've been out with my hard hat. And it's fascinating, right? Because this is an industry at the tipping point of change and global as well. So clearly we've got a lot of volatility, uncertainty. complexity, ambiguity in the market. We've got, supply chain disruption, labor, the wars, everything else that's happening. Green and ESG is a massive thing for us. We contribute 4 to 7% of greenhouse gases globally as an industry, the mining industry as a whole, we think, because we can't really measure scope 4 as yet. But, that's effectively, and we've got a mandate to bring that down to get to net zero. Right? Whether it be synthetics, whether it be how we actually work together, collaborate, share data to be able to drive that out. Compliance and regulations, it's changing our industry completely. There's a lot more coming in, and obviously it's different countries. Metals and mining supply chain collaboration, that's happening more and more, as I've said. We've got some real shifts and challenges where we believe that ESG and our evidence of ESG and our footprint is going to become a license to operate. Same way our product is, same way what we do in terms of iron ore mining. And there's a lot of there's amazing stuff happening out there in terms of synthetic resources, alternatives to water, alternatives to energy, what you do with recycling, etc. And then obviously mining innovation and automation, that is growing and pegged to increase from 5 billion now globally to 8.6 billion, I think, globally in terms of mining automation. So that market's rapidly changing. Clearly, that's a big shift for us. So what does a mine of the future look like? Just to bring that to life very, very quickly. So drones flying over a mine, identifying faults and challenges and issues. Addressing health and safety, right, by actually not sending somebody down a mine that's dangerous, but actually sending an autonomous vehicle or using AI and machine learning to actually drive robotic capabilities to be able to actually do the work. It's iron ore extraction. One of the biggest things is how do you crush a rock? And how do you crush a rock to the most optimal size in the most optimal way to actually also generate the most optimal measure of water, to your footprint, your ESG footprint as well, so to release the least amount of emissions. And that's a fascinating area. So things like light spectrum analysis, analytics, all data science, all data in terms of how it's driven out. Autonomous vehicles, we spoke about, wearables, right? Augmented reality. So not without its challenges, I'm not going to lie. You've got a site engineer who's been on site in Chile for 30 years, and he can listen to a truck driving past and tell you what's wrong with it, and now I'm telling him, here's your visualization dashboard, and this piece of kit in the background is going to tell you what you don't know. So clearly, there's a big shift, but that's really where I think that kind of how you make that change, how you force that change really comes in. And the use of AI analytics, and that's why my role is, I'm the group, I drive digital and data and that's the shift here, right, is that it's a business proposition, it's business solutions, it's business problems, it's to be able to actually drive that out. And it's to maximize the value of things within the digital space and data space that really drive, and it's to make sure that you've that thought leadership of data at its core, because that is one of the key enablers and critical ingredients. So not to get too, I'm sorry, I know my slides, it's the corporate world. But what I wanted to actually just show, because my presentation's about data science and monetization, right, is across the mining value chain. So you locate, you validate, you establish, you mine, you process, you mine waste, you get to your tailings, and you close, basically in terms of that value chain. These are really just examples of everywhere where we're using AI, analytics, data science, machine learning, simulations is king. Daniel mentioned it, digital twins, right? The days of like data governance, data model development, I think they're changing, right? I think you look at Formula One, where they've used simulations to be able to model optimal views and what good looks like, basically to drive actually the data they need to actually run the actual car, run the racecourse, right, and optimize the value of the car, the build of the car, and also the driver's ability as well. Digital twins, simulation, combine that with AI, machine learning, the different types of analytical use case in data science. So I spoke about light-sensitive analysis, predictive analytics. We're using all of that within the mining value chain at different areas. And blockchains become a real thing. So we just had the EU do the first proof of concept of blockchain across the mining, several mining organizations to be able to actually start looking at how we share data more readily. And then just almost in closure, and keep me honest, Mike, I'm marking the time. So I'm unashamedly promoting our company, but basically, as part of the Weir Group, we've been after this for years. We've always been an M&A type business, right? But we purchased an AI company based in Canada of 140 people in the form of Motion Metrics, and we've been integrating this into our company and our propositions for quite a while now. But effectively what that means is that they have 3D imaging cameras that sit on the mine site, and we real-time stream data from the mine. So we talk about predictive maintenance now, which are all clearly, things that we're all doing within this sector and the manufacturing sector. But it's about but there's far more bigger propositions in this space that we believe, and we believe that if we can get transparency of the mine, like mine site, you can actually generate far more insight and therefore far more valuable proposition to your customers. So what we do is we have products that we call shovel metrics, we have belt metrics, we have particle analysis metrics, we have analytical products that are actually in real-time streaming data in, right, where we're actually measuring whether your digger's prong has fallen off into the mine in real time, because it can debilitate an entire mine, right? And obviously that drives your predictive maintenance and your product design, etc. Afterwards, you feed that all back into internally. You can measure the rock particle size, how the truck's load, how many times the truck, drives past, the heaviness of it effectively, and you can actually you start measuring the payload, and you start driving metrics off that. And one of the big things here for us is around, monetization, right? This drives a completely different model with your customer. It's a partner model. You can go servitization we talk about, right? We talk about win-win contracts. You talk about moving from a supply-demand model to one that actually changes the game. And that's a big commercial step forward, but that's not possible if we don't take all this data. Right, it's not going to happen if we apply the same principles of data retention, et cetera, in the past. So key enablers, clearly, value, measurement, measure internally what you're doing from data analytics, measure, and even though it might not be externally kind of positioned and supported, I think, work with your finance and audit teams to get an economic valuation in place on your data, right? And as you build that out, I think it's absolutely critical. I think it's core of your data strategy, and I think it also will help. We've done ourselves no favors as CDOs. We build a lot of industries ourselves, and actually, why are we doing that? We should, we need to be thinking about this slightly differently, I think. Data ecosystem, it's interoperability. It's not about tick boxes. It's about that interoperability end to end. How you capture, create, and consume data in platform architecture, critical. Where you're going to hedge your bets, who you're going to hedge your bets with. Are you partnering because potentially you don't have the capability internally? Analytics toolkit, so really kind of getting to grips with your common governance standards, models, AI ethics. I think Daniel mentioned, he hates that word, but just really, you've got to have standardized protocols and guardrails. And op model, can't do this. A company cannot become digitally orientated. You cannot do digital transformation. You cannot achieve the outcomes you want to achieve from automating your operations, driving a customer proposition, etc., if you don't change your op model. So this is a big thing that you've got to advocate for. I do think, and old structures do not work. And then partner, buy, or build. So last slide really, or last thought from me is the cultural challenge. And I think it's come through the presentation. Monetization. Measure the value of your data, promote the value of your data, get quantifiable in terms of the economic benefit that it offers. And I think that's part of the key to unlock, really, and also then allow you to inform future decisions, right? So you don't actually make decisions in the moment now that could prohibit you from exploiting the value in the future.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you very much, Jill. Right, okay, same rules apply. We've got live microphones in the hall, but there's also Slido. If you want to submit your question via Slido, I will pass it on to Jill. Has anybody got a question for Jill for a start? Just stick your hand up.
Clear as mud.
No, don't know. Right in the back there, possibly. Thank you. Can you identify yourself, please, when you get the microphone?
Hi, it's Margaret Goffrey, Macco Associates. I'm not familiar with this, so I'm just interested to understand. You suggested, I think, that servitization would replace supply and demand. Could you just, if you said that, could you just explain that to me, please?
Yeah, sure. So what I mean by that is that if you want to move to a model of equipment as a service, for example, say now you produce products at the moment, you sell them into your customers, you want to move to a model where you've got equipment as a service, right? What we're looking at effectively is the application and use of digital solutions, so data solutions around that, to be able to actually get to a point where you can negotiate the price of that product in a different way. So it's not just about the tangible value of, let's say, a suite, right? You've got far further value you're adding as part of that suite, and you can actually start negotiating. So especially, I think, I'll give you a perfect example. Sorry, I'm not doing just justice. Perfect example, ESG, right? So if I can measure, if I am real-time streaming data from my mine site, from my product, from my digger. Now, I've sold that digger to a mining customer, right? They're using it effectively, and there was a price put on that digger. Now I'm actually real-time streaming data in. I'm really understanding the performance of that product, but also the emissions it releases, but also I'm understanding more of the value chain, right, of how that product performs in use within the operations of my customer. I can partner with my customer to say, I actually know where I can help you reduce energy. I can actually say to them, I've got a far more valuable data proposition here because you need this insight to actually know how you optimize your ESG footprint within your operations. I'm giving him added value, insight into his mining operation itself, and therefore you can start renegotiating your contracts on that basis. You can enter into a far more win-win service type model, even though you're selling a product. And that's with harnessing that data and the digital application of it.
One of the things that came up from what you were saying, airlines managed to mortgage their airline loyalty programs, etc. The value was 2 to 3 times as much as the airline itself was actually worth. With that in mind, is it fair to say that customers have no idea what they're giving away, the value of what they're giving away?
Definitely. I think, there are organizations clearly like RetailNet where they really understand it, and I think most organizations that deal, with B2C type models definitely understand it. I think, like a credit bureau definitely understands the value of what they're sitting with. I think a lot of organizations just don't know. I mean, an airline, you would never have said that their customer data would have been, priced or had that valuation against it. And I think, they've been doing a lot internally. They do dynamic pricing, so they've been on their own transformation journey from an AI, ML data perspective as well. But I think a lot of organizations do not know the value of what they're sitting with.
Okay. Any other questions from the floor? There, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jill Salmon from a company called CNDOS. Probably particularly around the type of industry you're in and the data that you're trying to gather from your value chain. How does that sit with the customers potentially not wanting to share that data because it might invalidate warranties and the usage of that product in real life?
No, it's not easy. It's a battle. I think so. There's a couple of things here. So if I give an example, Anglo American have just launched a platform solution called Voxel, VOXEL, and it's based. The primary premise of it is data sharing and IP. Right, and IP definition has got governance and controls built around it, and it's specifically in response to what's happening in the market on this basis, right? So we've got organizations like that where we will be asked to conform with their platform solution so that they can drive consistency in terms of that end-to-end measurement. But basically our engagement with customers at the moment, I think the key is to prove the value. It's about mutually vested interest and value. So if you look at the motion metrics proposition, we've got, where we track and measure the analytics across a mine site, right? So you've got that ecosystem of understanding that's really valuable for the customer themselves. And then if they share a little bit more, so give me your operations, your dispatch data. If I augment that data with this is then what I can generate for you. I can help you reduce your operational cost and increase productivity. So I think there's definitely an education, a sales, and actually bringing that value to life. And I suppose back to the monetization, it's about qualifying the benefit, right? And internally, every analytical use case that we're driving out and product we're driving on this basis, it's about what's the value at the end of the day? Can we make money from it? Is the customer, what is the customer going to think? And I think, there will be security concerns. You've got to address that. So what's your proposition? To the customer, basically, about how you're going to look after their data. You're not going to unsell it, or potentially you will, but it's having the rules in place that you go to them with, and potentially there will be negotiation at that point, but that's really the premise. And I think, the mining industry has been incredibly reluctant in the past. I've seen a complete shift this year, but I think a lot of it's to do with ESG, and the fact that we don't have a choice with scope 3 and 4, but to share.
It's finding something that will actually appeal to the company. I mean, about 5-6 miles away from where I stay in rural Aberdeenshire, there's it's a farming business, and they do biofuel. So they use silage a lot, to produce the methane in the first place. And it's a huge, massive operation. I mean, there's tractors and trailers coming in all the time. It's a bit like a mining company to a certain extent. Every day, there is sort of like a bonus that goes to the tractor driver, not that actually takes in the most silage, the tractor driver that actually drives in the most fuel efficient way.
Yeah. Agriculture's way ahead of us. I'm going to be honest, they've done a phenomenal job in that space. Yeah. I think there's another thing, things are changing, like you look at the farmers with milk, sorry, and it's probably my last point as well. They're all struggling with the big suppliers, the big supermarkets in terms of price suppression, right? They can't make money out of that. And, you as a farmer will get one price, you as a farmer will get another price. And so they've actually banded together. And there's now industry platforms driving index benchmarking and pricing. And that's only come about in the last few years, But so there's real kind of shifts happening, but capitalizing on that kind of data sharing premise and platform architecture.
Yeah, interesting. Any other questions on the floor? Back there, please. There we go. If you can stick your hand up again, please. I'm sure he saw you. Again, if you could identify yourself, please.
Hi, Gordon Coulter from Exmos. You made the point about the 30-year-old engineer that can just hear, and we see that in some of the factories where we work, where the older people can just tell, and they have that intuition. The younger generation just want a smartphone to tell them that there's a problem. And I guess as you talk about that thing where we try and automate and digitize more and more of these processes, historically we've seen things like in the stock market where computers get in a trading frenzy because the people who programmed them weren't the people who did the thing. They were the scientists and the engineers who didn't know all the nuances to watch out for. Do you foresee a problem where we start to rely too much and we lose these kind of old school skills that somebody can stand and look at something and go, you know what, that just doesn't seem quite right, we maybe shouldn't do that?
Yeah, I mean, all of this is augmenting existing human skills, right, and knowledge. And I think Daniel touched on that earlier as well. So, we've got it wrong in a lot of areas, and we have got a challenge culturally, with our mining organization, because they're doing really well. These guys are complete experts, girls are complete experts in what they do. They've been there so many years. You've got to respect and appreciate that knowledge, and no box is going to tell them, or understand or replicate that expertise. And, so what we've seen is, with the Motion Metrics purchase, when we purchased them, they were actually going out to engineering consulting firms to try and get that expertise in to drive their models and delivery and development. And you don't just do it once. This is an ongoing application. This is an ongoing collaboration. So the augmentation is critical. I think we're looking at different ways of doing that now, and clearly testing different models. But I think some people you're never going to change. You just have to embrace what they have and the value that they add. I think, but buddying up. Right, because the other problem I've got is I've got data science teams who haven't a clue what's happening on the ground in the business either, right? And that doesn't work. Yes, back office tech teams do not, and so I think the boards understand data, boards understand AI, and they talk about this stuff a lot, right? AI, data science, data, and what we're doing is about augmenting and supporting operations, right? That cold face. So why aren't we working with those people daily? As opposed to we're trying to build up models in the background. Clearly you've got to get the tech and everything else right, but I think that's part of the challenge, is kind of changing the model of how we engage and how we work. And I think that I've seen benefit now with fusion teams complementing like your hub spoke data analytics up model, kind of areas, right? So if the concept of a fusion team clearly, and that design canvas thinking, but having those people as part of a team to be able to deliver a product, a solution, a change. I think there's benefit in that.
Thank you.
You said something earlier that this involves a huge cultural shift for sort of C-class personnel. In the past, this is my information. I'm not sharing with you. Go away. This is the thing. I'm looking for my economic advantage in things. To then turn around to them and say, actually, no, there are real advantages to sharing, to being more collegiate. It's a massive jump for them.
Yeah, I don't get paid enough, Mark. I'm going to be honest. This is the gig, right? And it is a challenge because the digital fitness of your exec is important, and in every organization, it's different, right? And it's not completely there. So you'll have a few advocates like your CIO, CRO, CTOs now that are coming about and stuff, or CEO, which I've seen. But getting everybody to actually think in a digitally orientated, think that this is a game changer for the world. If you don't do something, it's going to be done to you, right? Like I spoke about the hydrogen battery with Anglo American. Stuff's coming left field here. So it is a big challenge. I think though, they have to change. That's the big thing. It's a hard job being a head of digital or data, because you've got to constantly push that down. What I have seen change though, the mining customers, whereas we still are, we work with people on the ground on the mine site, right? And that's who we kind of sell to, basically. Now what's happening is corporate have got digital transformation agendas. They want to have automated operations, better efficiency. They've got the ESG agenda, everything else. So the decisioning is changing. So, and that's just happening in our industry, but I'm sure it's happening in every industry, right? So there's a real force basically coming into play here, where we talk about a headwind.
Great. Question there from Graham Nichol. How do you think the democratization of data and its increasing federation will help or hinder monetization strategies?
Yeah. I think if you don't have control of your data, you've got to consider the fact that democratizing off the bat might be a bad thing to do. So I think there's a hygiene element to it internally, right? So you've got to, if you can't measure the value of your own data and you can't master the value of your own, you can't master your data itself, I think actually, thinking how you can actually monopolize that through a democratized op model is a bit of a pipe dream. I think there's a lot of hybrid models. I don't think there's just one size fits all, and I've seen that in the different companies I've worked in, and it's based on kind of your product set, the economics of the company, the organizational setup. But I do think, and also the legacy you're sitting on, because that's the problem for a lot of us, right? Is how you clean up the legacy and drive that kind of step change. So I don't have an answer for this as yet, but I think democratization is coming. It's critical. The open architectures, you look at the marketplace environments that are being built out by the big providers, etc. I do think, like we spoke about now, around kind of that augmenting skill sets, you know what I mean, at the cold face. I think it's critical. And obviously Fusion Teams is a part of democratizing, but I don't think there's one size fits all.
Surely there are people at the moment that are very much benefiting from the fact that it's not democratized. Yeah. It is in their hands, essentially.
Yeah,
so, what's going to be the driver for democratization?
So if you take someone like Facebook, regulation, and I think with ESG regulation will be coming in as well, right? But then secondly, I think it's about survival. So where are you going to make your money if you've got such competitive pressure and obviously differentiated on products, and you're moving to that servitization type model?
Okay. Yeah. Any other question from the floor? Gentleman there.
Hamish Lamott here, data scientist from Elliptic. I'm interested to hear a bit more about, you mentioned the applications of blockchain in mining. Maybe you could share some more details on that.
Yeah, sure. It's obviously a decentralized ledger, and there's been a few kinks in the change, but it runs the whole cryptocurrency market at the moment, right? So as a foundational architecture, if we think about, you're going to have far better experts talk about metaverse and stuff like that, because I mentioned that word inside my company and I think people get scared, and I'm still learning about it. But you think about the data sharing, that kind of what's happening, and as that's building out, right? How do you manage quality? How do you manage, as you're sharing data across your customer, with your customers, and they're sharing it with their supply chain, other supply chain individuals? How do you manage your data quality, the integrity, how do you validate it? It's not going to happen through sticking in a data governance platform, on the bottom of it. I think there's a lot of trading companies already. There's a lot of application for blockchain, to be fair. It's already being used in supply chains, right? It's already being used as trading platforms for a lot of the financial institutions, right? Processing trades on a day-to-day basis as well. It's got application not just in your supply chain. I think there's much broader application for it, to be honest with you. I think, and if you think about like logistics companies, we're transporting sugar over, different, if you think about our company, where we've got products we have to ship. When something breaks, you've got to ship a product all over the world, right? So how do you manage, basically, in a digital twin world, that end to end, and how do you ensure its integrity? So I think there's there's other solutions out there now coming in to rival blockchain, but I do think it has tremendous merit in this space.
Okay. Any more for any more? Okay, I am inclined to leave it there. Can you just thank Jill one more time,
Thank
please?
you very much.
Thank you very much.